This is another Patreon video, so I just want to take the time to thank the patrons. Really appreciate it. Thanks a lot. One other thing I want to quickly mention is the feedback I got on the last video. I was really blown away by that. You know, I've been making videos for about almost 3 years now, and I would say that that's probably the most positively received video I've ever made. So really appreciate the feedback on that. Thanks a lot.
As soon as you're born, they make you feel small by giving you no time instead of it all. Till the pain is so big you feel nothing at all. A working class hero is something to be. A working class hero is something to be.
Following his historic win over Stipe, Cormier's post-fight turned into a WWE-style promo when Balco experiment Brock Lesnar entered the cage. Even with his suit on, you could tell he's on steroids. The chair he was sitting on would probably fail a fucking test. As if we needed any further confirmation, he gets in the octagon and starts roid raging all over the fucking place. As he moved across the cage, I could have sworn I saw a hazy trail of chemicals in the air. But the guy knows how to cut a promo, calling the entire division piece of shits and just generally creating a ruckus. You know, Brock is a fighter I love to hate, but that I do love to hate. Like, I'll never forgive the guy for tipping Mark Hunt over the edge, but I do enjoy when he's around. He's a big, angry, intimidating lunatic, and he always promises a spectacle. But obviously, total WWE bullshit. Not an ounce of real animosity here. Cormier confirmed as much in the post-fight.
I've known Brock since 1997. That's why when he pushed me like that, it was very odd. I was like, yo.
Anyway, this little promo would set the tone for much of the next year with regards to the heavyweight belt. Even in a post-fight, Cormier was adamant about only wanting big fights, flat out rejecting the idea of Oezdemir or Santos. Before I get into that though, I just want to comment on an unbelievable question that Stipe was asked in his post-fight presser. He was struggling very hard to put on a brave face. He was largely sidestepping questions about the disappointment of losing his belt, diverting instead to the fact that his wife was about to have a daughter, and he was looking forward to that. Then some reporter jumped in and asked him the following question.
It seems like this DC versus Brock Lesnar fight is going to happen next. Obviously, you know, fighting Brock Lesnar, a massive payday, life-changing type of stuff. Do you think going forward, any part of you is going to kind of think about the what if you would come out of this fight on top?
I mean, if you watch this post-fight, you can see Stipe is distraught, totally full of emotions. As I've said, he was going out of his way to avoid addressing a loss. And then this guy's like, hey Stipe, not only did you lose your belt, you just lost out in a mega payday, you fucking idiot. It's like, you know, you gotta time your questions. Hey Stipe, how do you feel about the fact that you and everyone you know and love will one day perish? The sun will burn out, the earth will be dormant, and you won't even be a memory. Can you comment on mortality, please? I just thought the question was so tone deaf. It's unbelievable.
I'm having a daughter, that's pretty much life-changing. I don't know about that, but...
Anyway, despite his record-breaking reign, he quickly slid out of the title picture, as Cormier's focus lasered in on Brock Lesnar. DC initially felt Jones, who was dealing with a drug suspension, was out of the picture, and didn't want to offer his old rival a platform, instead setting his sights firmly on Lesnar.
We're living in my world now, so I dictate the rules. So yeah, and plus I just really don't like Jones, so I'll never give him a platform.
On social media, Jones gave Cormier credit for winning a heavyweight belt, but framed his light heavyweight reign as nothing but a placeholder. DC was simply keeping his belt warm while he was out. In September, the first signs of a rekindling of the old rivalry emerged, when John made some comments describing how he'd basically like to crush Cormier's spirit at light heavyweight before wiping him off the fucking map at heavyweight.
But my vision is fighting him at light heavyweight first. I think beating him a third time would really do something to his confidence. And I want to crush that confidence. I want to break his will. I want to break the idea of him thinking he could beat me. And so I believe doing that at light heavyweight would be the smartest thing to do for a third time. And then leading into our possible fourth fight for the heavyweight championship of the world, his confidence won't be in the right spot. It won't. And I think it'll help me take that fourth victory over him and that heavyweight championship from him.
Cormier didn't take the bait. When asked about a third fight, he remained single-minded about Lesnar.
Is there a fight that could happen between you guys at this point? I've got to fight with Brock Lesnar. Why would I look back? Why would I look back to Jones now when I've got to fight?
But he did also comment on the absurdity of USADA's ruling.
70 times since I started wrestling internationally, and I have never made a mistake. It's not that hard. So to even be having to sit here and do this again shows that you guys are ridiculous.
And this prompted a vicious back and forth on Instagram, where we got to see all of the animosity and vitriol boil to the surface. You know, we've seen rivalries temper with time, but this one absolutely has not. These two motherfuckers will be fighting outside the old folks' home. John fighting dirty, bashing Cormier over the head with a fucking Zimmer frame. This is the type of beef that you have to appreciate. It cuts so deep. And here in these posts, we gotta look at that. Some absolute fire from both guys. Jones went the psychoanalytical approach. He must have been brushing up on his Freud before he wrote the following. At DC, you mad, bro? USADA keeps calling, but you're not gonna pick up the phone. Because the second you hear them say I'm innocent is the instant the illusion you've created shatters. Then it's all real again. And that's not a step you're willing to take. Instead, you wrap yourself in your fake belt and keep telling yourself the shin that slammed into your face and the performance that buried you once again was enhanced. The fact you can't beat me kills you, and it stops you from picking up that phone. If you answer it, then the nightmare becomes reality. Then again, maybe you do pick up. Accept the truth that you were defeated by a superior fighter, and that gives you peace. Now this is the most vicious line in it. Or it goes the other way, and you get motivated to try a third time, and that will save me the hassle of having to dig you up before I bury you. What a fucking line. That will save me the hassle of having to dig you up before I bury you. Brilliant. You know, there was a back and forth between Israel Adesanya and Jon Jones recently on Twitter. A lot of people are giving Israel credit on the mic, and he is charismatic. Dana is putting a ton of faith in Adesanya's star potential. But I thought Jones just fucking buried him. I'd say Jon is probably the most underrated trash talker in the sport. It was really only Chael throttled him on the mic. And that's not really saying anything because, you know, that's Chael. He's gonna talk circles around anyone in the game. But on this occasion, Cormier had an answer, and it was a good one. So here we go again, Johnny boy. First off, if you did nothing wrong and were innocent, then you'd have never been suspended. You've had to stand before these people and arbitrators so many times it's insane. You slipped again. How many times can one man slip? I've been tested 70 times, and I haven't slipped once. How do you explain that? And on top of all the cheating you've done around UFC 182, UFC 200, and UFC 214, that's not even a straw that broke the camel's back. You are actually a snitch. You think you're the only one that's been offered this deal? No. You're just the only scumbag low enough to take it. Oh, that is a fucking knockout line. You are just the only scumbag low enough to take it. Which one of your teammates did you tell on to get this joke of a punishment from USADA? I thought there was nothing lower than a cheater, but it's not surprising that you show me a whole new level. You're a cheater and a snitch. Man, this is unbelievable. That is some fucking fire. I would say those two guys treated those Instagram posts like they were final year projects. Cormier was probably up all night, cups of coffee to stay awake. Jones, well, we know what Jones was taking to stay awake. There's more legit fire in those two Instagram posts than we've seen in a while in the UFC. You just cannot manufacture that type of deep-seated animosity. Utter contempt. Less than a month later, Cormier was already warming to the idea of a third fight.
He's a phenomenal talent. He's a fantastic fighter. He's just, he is just he's just a cheater. At the end of the day, he's just a cheater. And ultimately, that fault that he's a cheater does not deter me from wanting to compete against him again.
DC was also totally clear about wanting to fight at 205. He says he wants to fight under the circumstances he lost, right those wrongs. And I can understand the sentiment. But there's also obviously a huge incentive not to put his heavyweight belt on the line against Jones. I mean, if you think about the lengths Cormier had to go to separate himself from John, his entire light heavyweight reign was under the specter of Jones. Despite beating some outstanding competition, there was always a sense that his light heavyweight belt didn't represent the best fighter in a division. Now, Jones can never take or diminish Cormier's heavyweight win over Stipe, who was in his own right a legit outstanding champion. But Cormier's at the end of his career. The idea that his swan song could have Jones once again standing over his limp body and snatching his heavyweight crown must be a horrific prospect. In that case, Jones will have essentially overshadowed his entire career at the highest level and put a full stop on it. Cormier has a lot to lose under those circumstances. In November, DC dispatched Derek Lewis to save UFC 230, apparently receiving a mega payday to take the fight on short notice. On a side note, Cormier offered some insight into his work ethic. His catchphrase, "embrace the grind," appeared to have been hammered into his head as a child, watching his father bust his fucking ass to provide for him and his siblings.
He would get up at 8 a.m. in the morning, man, and go and work and cut the baseball fields, clean the bathrooms at the parks. He was the guy that walked out there and lined those fields for kids to go play baseball. Then he would get off at 5 o'clock, drive home, take a bath and eat, and then he would drive to the pizza parlor where he washed dishes from 6:30 till 11. And he did this constantly. And when he wasn't at the pizza parlor, he would cut the graveyard, the cemetery, push the graveyard, or he would work on cars. He just always hustled. And I'm like, man, if I can watch this man over the entirety of my life spend his days and days and days just working, why can't I do the same thing for my children?
And Cormier does represent that type of fighter. He works as an analyst, does commentary, teaches kids wrestling. He's often been referred to as a type of team leader at AKA, and in his spare time, kind of as a hobby, he had time to win belts in 2 different divisions. The guy's work ethic is fucking heroic. Following his win over Derek Lewis, Cormier appeared on a Helwani Hour and finally expressed a sense of closure regarding the Jones rivalry. To be honest, I was glad to hear this. We know Cormier isn't afraid of Jones, and it is the only blemish on his record. But for a guy who is on such a high at the end of his career, on the verge of going out on top, a third Jones fight seems like an insane risk. I remember seeing a clip of Brendan Schaub where he made the point that with or without steroids, Jones would have won his second fight. And I think a lot of people would probably agree with that. But it's really not a fair assessment. I mean, the whole reason they go in there is to answer that question. But Jones prevented it from being answered in an honest fashion. The first fight was competitive. Cormier was doing well in the second. He has a legitimate reason to want to revisit the whole rivalry. But despite the fact that he has a valid grievance with regards to the second fight, I was totally on board with the idea that he was over Jones, and the final chapter of his career would represent a further divergence from his old nemesis.
I don't need it anymore. Sometimes you need things and sometimes you don't. And I mean, I don't understand the logic of I need anyone anymore. I don't.
Cormier also correctly predicted that there would be USADA issues for John heading into the Gustafsson fight.
Can I really trust that he's truly going to be back in the game? Because history shows that there will probably be some sort of issue either before the Gustafsson fight or after the Gustafsson fight. And if not for the Gustafsson fight, we schedule a fight, there's definitely going to be an issue because there's always been an issue.
And Jones did return against Gustafsson amid a cloud of controversy, but showing no signs of ring rust, and reminded the sport of the force of nature he truly is. A flawless performance where he obliterated any memory of their first fight. In the aftermath, he immediately turned his attention to Cormier.
I know there's a guy who's been calling himself champ. I mean, what guy just gives up his belt because somebody else made it home? Daddy's home, DC. Prove to the fans you're a champ.
In January, one potential hurdle to a Jones-Cormier Trilogy fight came down when DC pushed back his retirement date indefinitely to accommodate recovering from an injury.
And I've had some things injury-wise that is really kind of holding me back right now. There are a couple things that have happened that I can't really get going like I want to. So we'll see what it is. I really do still intend to be done with this thing really soon. It's a personal decision that I made with my family, and we'll see what happens. But
now, I got to admit, I love DC's rationale for wanting to retire at 40.
You don't know when Father Time just says, okay, enough. You don't know when eventually the time is up on what I can do with my body, and I don't want that to happen inside the octagon. But I want the memories of me to be, me hoisting those titles and having both belts and beating some of the greatest fighters in the world.
Love the sentiment. Save yourself the inevitable catastrophic downfall that comes with competing at the highest level beyond your expiration date as an elite athlete. Even though I'm still somewhat skeptical of GSP's retirement, guys like him and hopefully DC represent the ideal of how to exit a detrimental sport. Throughout February and April, Cormier kept his focus on Lesnar, but it began to seem less and less likely the walking sack of steroids would come to terms with the UFC. In early May, Stipe, who had been quietly campaigning from the sidelines, was finally granted a rematch. Unlike the first fight, something of a beef has developed between Cormier and Stipe, but it's unlikely to go much further. Stipe certainly won't be fanning the flames now that he's got the fight, and he's never going to welcome a back and forth with DC. It's just not his nature. The first fight, short as it was, did leave some questions. There was a matter of the eye pokes from Cormier. Stipe had some early success. He didn't appear at all overmatched. So the fight will once again be a simple matter of determining, in an absolute sense, who is the greatest fighter on the fucking planet. Beyond that, Stipe now represents the most significant obstacle to the biggest grudge match the UFC can put on, and a trilogy fight that, if booked, will likely be the major event of 2019. If Cormier emerges victorious against Stipe, then for his final fight, his swan song, the focus of the sport will narrow in on one individual, his old nemesis, his bitterest rival, Jon Jones. As of late, Cormier has said the Jones fight is all he wants.
Yeah, man, look, man, it's all I want. I think when I fight Jones, I think that I feel most complete when I'm preparing for a competition against that guy, because it makes me train harder. It makes me train smarter. I do everything right in preparation, and I believe that if I do stick around, that would be the fight that I would do it for. It would be at 205 pounds, because I need to go and get that back from him.
For Jones, his most recent comment was to torpedo the fight, stating that Cormier will never again make light heavyweight, and that at heavyweight, DC represents too much of a risk.
But there's no way he's coming back to light heavyweight. To commit your life to lose that type of weight and to come up short again would be so devastating. I doubt he'd put himself through that for the third time. My greatest chance of losing would be to a guy like Daniel Cormier, with giving him a power and strength advantage over me. It just doesn't make sense. Right now I make light heavyweight very easily, and it just would make no sense to fight a guy who I think technically on your level, and to give him a size advantage. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it.
Luke Thomas recently mentioned that he feels Jones is actually selling a fight here. And I agree, he's almost painting himself as an underdog, trying to put out the idea that if they fight at heavyweight, Cormier not only has a chance, but he'll have numerous advantages. But beyond selling a fight, he's also likely negotiating. He's simultaneously hyping Cormier up while making it clear he's not at all interested in a fight at heavyweight, which is a very strong position to take from a negotiation perspective. It's worth mentioning here that multiple times over the last few months, Jones has been totally clear that in order to move to heavyweight, the UFC would have to provide a serious financial incentive.
I feel like we have to see this.
I feel like if the fight were to happen, it would be him challenging me at light heavyweight, or it would be the UFC throwing a ridiculous amount of money for us to make it happen at heavyweight.
Last two things Dana White said, I think it was earlier this week, that time for a Daniel Cormier, Jon Jones third fight is now. It's going to happen. What are your thoughts on that?
He said that?
He did on ESPN.
Did he? Well, bring out the checkbook, Dana. Let's make it happen. I'll definitely do it for the right number.
So I think Jones is both trying to create a demand for a trilogy fight at heavyweight and give himself maximum leverage for that negotiation. It's a very clever stance for John to take on the whole thing. So even though he says there's no way the fight happens, if Cormier gets through Stipe, I'd say the opposite is true. There is almost no way that fight doesn't happen. And in that case, Cormier will be facing one of the biggest swing fights ever. If he can end his career avenging his only loss against arguably the greatest natural talent we've ever seen, then he will slide in right alongside the likes of GSP as having one of the greatest careers ever. But if he loses, and especially at heavyweight, that fairy tale ending goes right out the fucking window. Jon Jones will have stomped the shine out of his retirement, and he will end his career once again in Jones' shadow. A trilogy fight with Jones to end Cormier's career will have an enormous impact on how that career is remembered. The fight represents a monumental risk for Daniel Cormier.
A working class hero is something to be. A working class hero is something to be. When they tortured and scared you for 20 odd years, then they expect you to pick a career. When you can't really function, you're so full of fear. A working class hero is something to be. A working class hero is something to be.
Courtney said, monumental risk for monumental reward. What a fight that would be. What happens if Stipe snatches a belt from DC? I already answered this question, actually. I said I was wondering about that myself. Like, Jones wouldn't want to fight Cormier coming off a loss, but if DC commits to dropping a weight, he might still get that fight. He was a longtime champ at light heavyweight and never lost his belt. But on top of that, DC ultimately gave Stipe an immediate rematch. So it wouldn't be crazy to think that even if DC loses, he could still conceivably be the number one contender in both divisions. Fight for whichever belt he wants. The reality is, though, I have no idea what's going to happen if Cormier loses. But if he gets stopped in brutal fashion, I think retirement is the move most consistent with his desire to get out of the sport in a timely manner. If Stipe stops him, I think Cormier retires. David Leon Bick, best MMA channel on YouTube. Well, thank you very much. I have a bad feeling for DC in this Stipe fight. It'll be horrible to get his heavyweight title undercut by Stipe and not even getting the option to challenge Jones again. Well, I am a Stipe fan too. And he was a great champ. And, as I said, after I thought about it, a loss to Stipe, that might not even be a roadblock to DC Jones 3. So we'll just see how it plays out, Here's a funny analogy from the Beautiful Panic podcast. Like Amadeus, the man who has devoted his entire life to perfection in competition, always focused on the path of a champion, making the choices a champion makes, only to be second to the wild and raw genius of a madman, who was simply done with a gift. That's a good comment, actually. This is a reference to the movie Amadeus, which is about a rivalry between Mozart and Salieri. Salieri was a diligent, kind of a painstaking, methodical, hard-working composer, while Mozart was just a reckless pisshead, a party animal, a fucking drunk, a bit of a loudmouth asshole who happened to be touched by genius. So it's a funny comparison. Salieri was an embrace-the-grind type musician, while Mozart was a dodgy dick pill, crystal meth under the boardwalk type genius. I think the comparison is more generous to Jones, though. From what I remember from the film, Salieri was a bitter, jealous piece of shit, hell-bent on Mozart's demise. Cormier's not quite that now. He's not a selfish, bitter prick, and he will have an all-time great legacy of his own. But as I said, it's a funny, abstract comparison to make. Very good. Edwin Campos, love the video, but I hate this fight. I can understand the sentiment, especially considering it's likely to be Cormier's last. John walks around at 240 pounds. The heavyweight champions are usually around that. Stipe, Jr., Kane, etc. I've no reason to believe Cormier can close a gap that much. Cormier did well here and there, but he never landed a takedown, never rocked him, never cut him or bruised him, never threatened a submission. I don't have any reason to believe Cormier will beat Jones. Yeah, that's true, and I think a lot of people would see it that way. But from Cormier's perspective, he's got to be thinking Jones was chemically enhanced. The second fight was not a fair contest or representation of their true skills. So, I can definitely see an argument for either side here. Especially when Father Time taps you on your shoulder and tells you it's time to go home. I feel at 40 years old, that can be any day now. I think sometimes we think of a great rivalry and build-up and think it will bring us a great fight. I know Maymack is totally different, but everyone talked about Floyd's age, Conor's punching power, smaller gloves, etc., etc. At the end of it all, I had a feeling of, yeah, that's what was going to happen all along. Floyd was selling himself as the underdog there too. I think we will arrive at the same feeling if a trilogy happens. Yeah, that's very likely. You'd have to favor Jones on the basis of the previous two fights. But Cormier's not dead in the water. It's definitely a compelling matchup, even at this point. Conor Hellman, I see two paths. One where DC's greatness will be forgotten after a loss to Jones, forever known as the man who was his second best, the one who was good but not great. Or one where he ends up on top. To end his career, he beats a real killer twice, in Stipe, and caps it all off by beating the greatest mixed martial artist in most eyes, beating the man who he couldn't, beating the man no one could. The question is, the risk justified for the reward? Well, I don't think Cormier be forgotten exactly. He's already secured his place as having one of the best careers ever. But yeah, in terms of risk to reward, Jesus Christ. It has to be one of the biggest swing fights in history in terms of the implications. A Jon Jones trilogy retirement fight for Cormier. Jesus Christ. It's either unimaginable redemption or just the cruelest twist of fate. Gamble of a fucking lifetime here. Kieran Jordan. Always found the way Jones moves, talks, and acts to be pretty daunting. The guy has the most intimidating presence of any athlete I can think of. You get the sense that he's a genuine psychopath. Doesn't really seem to possess the same level of care or emotion as the rest of us. That personality doesn't seem forced either. Seems to just naturally end up in his opponent's head as a consequence of the manner with which he carries himself. Now, this is an interesting point because if you go back to when Jones first arrived in the scene, one of the major criticisms of the guy was that he had a fake attitude. A fake, humble, holier-than-thou attitude. A lot of people saw through it. I would almost say the majority of people saw through it. Now, I wasn't making videos at that time, but I can tell you I was not in that category. I couldn't see any reason to hate the guy. I thought he was a decent, a kind of a clean-cut fighter. And it made sense to me. I couldn't imagine that he'd be such a phenom cleaning out a division of killers if he wasn't living a clean life. If there was a darker side to him that he was hiding. I couldn't imagine that. But a lot of people were voicing the same opinion as Kieran here. And look what happened. They were right in the sense that there was a darker side. There was a lot of drink and drugs and partying going on behind the choir song Jones was singing. I think a lot of people feel that Jones is a dark individual. I think you got that right. Anyway, again, thanks a lot for the feedback. Thank you very much.